The alien commander watched the human prisoner with a gaze that could melt steel. The interrogation chamber was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of metal and sterilized precision. The walls hummed with unseen power, and yet the human sat there relaxed, almost amused. She leaned forward, her obsidian black eyes narrowing. "Why aren't you afraid, human?" Silence stretched between them. The weight of 1,000 conquered civilizations loomed behind her words. The Zorvith Empire had razed entire planets, crushed fleets, broken species beneath its heel. And yet here was this lone human, smirking. He chuckled. A low, dangerous sound. "Afraid?" He met her gaze, unblinking. "Lady, I should be the one asking you that." A week earlier, Earth's final stand. The Zorvith Armada arrived like a storm. 50 warships darkened the skies over Earth, their presence a silent declaration of dominance. Cities drowned in shadow as the massive vessels hovered, weapons humming with restrained destruction. The ultimatum was simple: surrender, or be erased. The Galactic Council had already fled, declaring humanity lost. The transmission that followed from Earth, however, was unexpected. A single message. 4 words. "You first. Bring friends." It wasn't bravado. It was a promise. The Zorvith, battle-hardened and ruthless, had seen species beg for mercy. They had never seen a planet taunt them. The interrogation room, now. The commander studied the human. His face bore fresh scars, his uniform torn, but his posture? Relaxed. Too relaxed. She leaned closer. "Your world is burning. Your defenses crumbled in hours. Your leaders are missing. And yet you sit there smiling?" Her claws tapped against the metal table. "Why?" The human exhaled slowly, as if considering whether she was worth the answer. Then he grinned. "Because you don't understand what happens next." A flicker of something crossed her face. Confusion? No. Irritation. "I understand perfectly. The Zorvith have never been defeated in open war." He tilted his head. "Open war? Lady, you just invaded Earth. And you think that was the war?" Her frown deepened. The human leaned forward, his voice almost a whisper. "That was just foreplay." Earth's response: the storm breaks. The Zorvith fleet had expected immediate retaliation. Bombardments. Suicide attacks. The desperate final gambit of a species backed into a corner. Instead there was silence. Cities emptied overnight. Communications went dark. Power grids flickered and died. No screams. No resistance. Just nothing. The Zorvith commanders hesitated. They had seen this tactic before. Species abandoning their worlds, leaving behind traps, using desperation as their final weapon. But this was different. And then the first ship vanished. Not destroyed. Not shot down. Simply gone. One moment, the Vrantal floated in formation above Earth. The next, it was not there. No explosion. No trace. Just empty space where a warship had been. Panic rippled through the fleet. They scanned, recalibrated, reached out on every frequency. And then another ship disappeared. And another. Then a message blinked onto every screen, every transmission relay. A voice, calm and human. "Welcome to the real war." The commander in the interrogation room had no idea any of this was happening. Not yet. But she would. Back in the interrogation room. She folded her arms. "You think your kind can stop what's coming?" The Zorvith. The human cut her off with a single word. "Wrong." She blinked. "Excuse me? You keep talking about the Zorvith like there's some unstoppable force." He leaned back. "You're missing the point." She scowled. "Then enlighten me." He exhaled. "You thought you invaded Earth. What you actually did was walk into a war you don't even understand." Her claws curled against the table. "Elaborate." The human smiled. "You're asking the wrong questions. Instead of, 'Why aren't you afraid?' you should be asking." The lights in the room flickered. A tremor rattled the walls. And the alarms began to scream. The human's grin widened. There it is. High orbit, the first strike. Above Earth, the Zorvith fleet realized, too late, that they had never been the hunters. They were the prey. Their ships began to detonate. Not from outside attacks, but from within. Engines melted into slag. Life support collapsed. Control systems went rogue, locking Zorvith warriors out of their own command centers. And then the worst part. Humans. On board. No one had seen them arrive. No one knew how they had gotten past the ship's defenses. But security cameras showed empty hallways one moment, and armed humans the next. They came in silence. moving like ghosts, leaving bodies in their wake. By the time the Zorvith fleet realized what was happening, half their warships were already lost. The humans were not fighting for Earth anymore. They were hunting. And the Zorvith had just become the hunted. Interrogation room, the last question. The commander's wrist communicator crackled with panicked voices. Sector 4 is. They're inside the bodies in the air vents. How did they? They're laughing. These things are laughing as they. Silence. Her breath caught. She turned slowly to face the human, who was now watching her with the patience of a predator who had just won. You asked why I wasn't afraid, he said softly. It's because I already knew how this would end. He stood, stretching. The cuffs on his wrist slid to the floor. Unlocked. Her blood turned to ice. His voice was calm, almost amused. Now, let's see if you know how to be afraid. And then he moved. The moment the human moved, the Zorvith commander's instincts screamed at her. She reached for her sidearm, too slow. The human had already closed the distance. His hands, free from the cuffs that should have held him, lashed out. Not in a wild attack but with precise, controlled brutality. Crack. Her arm twisted the wrong way and the sidearm skittered across the floor. Pain lanced through her, but she had no time to react before. Thud. Her back slammed against the cold metal wall. The human pinned her effortlessly, one hand around her throat, the other pressing against her armored chest plate. Not squeezing. Not yet. Just holding her there. Letting her feel it. For the first time in her career she felt small. He wasn't grinning anymore. The amusement had vanished. In its place something else lurked. Something ancient, something that understood war at a level she never had. She had asked him why he wasn't afraid. Now she finally understood. He had never been the one in danger. High orbit, the slaughter continues. The Zorvith fleet was burning. No, it was being erased. Ships detonated in eerie silence, their explosions swallowed by the void. What should have been an organized planetary siege had turned into a massacre. They still didn't understand how. No fleet had entered the system. No planetary defense network had activated. There had been no warning. And yet, humans were everywhere. They appeared on warships in command centers, deep in the bowels of the fleet's reactors. No alarms had been triggered before they arrived. They simply materialized. No one knew how. But by the time the Zorvith officers even registered their presence, it was already too late. The interrogation room, a lesson in fear. The commander struggled, her claws gripping the human's arm. She was strong, stronger than most species in the galaxy. She had ripped through reinforced plating with her bare hands before. It didn't matter. The human's grip was like iron. Let me go, she growled, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. He studied her for a moment. Then he did. Just like that. She stumbled but caught herself, rubbing at her throat. The restraint unnerved her more than the attack. He had let her go because he wanted to. Not because she had fought him off. Not because she had won. Because he had chosen to. She clenched her jaw. What the hell are you? His lips curled upward. A human. Her mandibles twitched in frustration. I know that. But how are you doing this? How are your people on my ships, in my command centers, inside my fleet? His smile widened. You still don't get it. Her claws flexed. Then make me understand. His voice was almost a whisper. We were never on Earth. She stilled. A terrible, awful realization began to claw its way into her mind. No, that wasn't possible. The fleet had scanned the planet. They had seen billions of humans below. They had launched an invasion based on those readings. But now her fleet was dying. And the humans weren't fighting like a species protecting their home. They were fighting like a species that had already won. She activated her wrist communicator. Report. Static. She tried another frequency. I said report. Nothing. Her secondary communicator blinked with a single incoming transmission. She hesitated. Then, slowly she accepted the call. A Zorvith officer appeared on the holoscreen. His face was pale, eyes wide with terror. "See, Commander," he stammered, "they're not human." Her blood ran cold. What do you mean? The officer's breathing was ragged. They're moving through walls. Her claws dug into the table. That's impossible. We thought so too. The officer's voice cracked. Until one of them walked straight through a bulkhead, grabbed my second in command and the transmission cut out. Not because the officer had ended it. Because something had ended him. Her throat went dry. She turned back to the human. You're lying. He shook his head. You thought you attacked Earth. You didn't. Her heart pounded. Then where the hell did my fleet go? His grin was predatory. A trap. The trap revealed the final mistake. The Zorvith fleet had never surrounded Earth. They had surrounded a projection. A perfectly simulated, hyper-realistic illusion. Earth had never been beneath them. The planet they had surrounded, the atmosphere they had scanned, the humans they had seen, all fabrications. Ghosts in a machine. A decoy so perfect that it fooled every sensor, every scan, every mind that looked upon it. The real Earth? Somewhere else. Watching. Waiting. And when the Zorvith had stepped into the trap, that's when the real war had begun. Interrogation room, the breaking point. The commander took a step back. For the first time in her life she felt it. Fear. The human exhaled. This is the part where you realize you were never the predator. Her claws curled into fists. The human tilted his head. Tell me, Commander, what do you think happens next? A chill ran down her spine. And then, the lights flickered again. Only this time when they came back on. She was no longer alone with him. Behind the human, more figures stood. They hadn't come through the door. There had been no sound. No warning. They were just there. And they were smiling. Her breath caught. The human's voice was soft, almost comforting. You asked me why I wasn't afraid. He leaned in, whispering the last words she would ever hear before her world fell apart. Because we were never trapped in here with you. You were trapped in here with us. The Zorvith commander didn't breathe. She couldn't. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a wild beast trying to escape its cage. The room was too small now, the air too thick. For new humans stood behind the prisoner. No, not behind. With him. And they were just watching her. Calm. Relaxed. Like this was already over. The human she had interrogated, her prisoner, took a slow step forward. His voice was soft. You feel it now, don't you? The lights flickered again. The air temperature dropped. A shadow shifted in the corner of the room, where nothing should have moved. Her instinct screamed. She took a shaky step back. What is this? The human's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. The end of your fleet. Her wrist communicator vibrated violently. She snatched it up, forcing her voice into something resembling control. Status report. Static. Then, screaming. They're inside. We don't know how. We sealed every bulkhead. A wet, gurgling sound. Then silence. Another voice cut in, one of her bridge officers. His voice was shaking. Commander, we're losing the fleet. Her blood turned to ice. How? We have the advantage. We have the... They're already here. The words weren't from her communicator. They came from behind her. She turned. One of the humans, a woman, tilted her head slightly. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. Not human eyes. Predator eyes. You never really had a fleet, she said softly. You had a graveyard. The slaughter above Earth, a fleet erased. The Zorvith battlecruiser Torvok drifted in orbit, its once imposing structure gutted from the inside. Bodies floated in zero-G. Lifeless. Silent. Throughout the fleet, Zorvith officers barricaded themselves in control rooms, storage compartments, and reinforced bunkers. They locked the doors. They activated defense drones. It didn't help. The humans came anyway. They weren't using shuttles. They weren't breaching from the outside. They were appearing inside the ships. 1 second, a corridor was empty. The next, a human was standing there. A blur of motion. A flash of steel. And then, another Zorvith corpse floated weightlessly, throat slit, eyes frozen open in horror. The officers tried to fight. They failed. The humans didn't use energy weapons. No plasma rifles. No disruptors. They fought with knives. Blades, axes, monomolecular-edged weapons that never ran out of ammunition. One by one the ships fell silent. One by one the Zorvith fleet ceased to exist. The interrogation room, a commander's nightmare. The Zorvith commander clenched her jaw, forcing the panic down. She wasn't prey. She wasn't some coward to die cowering in a corner. She was Zorvith. She reached for the hidden blade in her armor. Fast. Precise. Aimed for the human's throat. The human didn't move. His hand caught her wrist before she even saw him react. A shock of pain shot up her arm as he twisted. The blade clattered to the floor. He sighed. You still don't get it. Her breathing was ragged. Then explain it to me, damn you. He leaned in. Too close. You think you invaded Earth. His voice was almost a whisper. You didn't. The blood drained from her face. Her voice was hoarse. That's impossible. We scanned the planet. We saw your people. You saw what we wanted you to see. A low hum filled the room, the ship's AI system rebooting. The overhead speakers crackled, then a new voice filled the chamber. Not a Zorvith voice. A human one. Good evening, Commander. Welcome to your new flagship. The human's smile widened. Oh, right. He motioned at the walls. This isn't your ship anymore. She staggered back, claws scraping uselessly at the walls. No, that's not. A new screen flickered on. A fleet status report. Zorvith ships, 0. Human-controlled ships, 49. She stared. Her fleet was gone. Or worse, it belonged to them now. Her mind reeled. Her entire species' military strategy had been overpowered in a single night. Why? She whispered. The human's gaze darkened. Because you didn't listen. His voice was quiet. We told you Earth was off limits. She trembled. What happens now? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The transmission flickered, displaying a final message. One sentence. We are coming. The Zorvith commander's body refused to move. It wasn't fear, at least that's what she told herself. It was something worse. A realization so vast, so absolute, that it paralyzed her. Her fleet was gone. Her warships, once the pride of the Zorvith Empire, were now under human control. Her warriors, elite soldiers trained from birth, were dead. And the human standing in front of her, her prisoner just hours ago, now looked at her with quiet amusement. Like this had been inevitable. Like her entire invasion had been a joke. We told you Earth was off limits, he said again, voice calm, conversational. You should have listened. The overhead lights flickered once more. Then the alarm stopped. The emergency klaxons that had been blaring across the ship, across the entire fleet, fell into eerie silence. Her communicator vibrated in her palm. A single message. A transmission from the Zorvith High Command. Hands shaking, she raised it to her ear. Commander, the voice was hollow, distant. We surrender. The words crashed into her like a physical blow. Surrender? The Zorvith Empire? Impossible. She swallowed hard. We don't. We do. The voice cut her off. The speaker was trembling. You don't understand. It's not just your fleet. It's the homeworld. It's everywhere. Pause. A breathless whisper. They're already inside the Empire. Her heart stuttered. What? Every capital ship. Every planetary defense network. Every colony station. We thought they were on Earth. We thought that's where we were fighting them. The voice cracked. We were wrong. A cold weight settled in her stomach. What did he mean? She turned, meeting the human's gaze. He was still watching her, calm, patient, like a teacher waiting for a student to understand the lesson. Then it hit her. The invasion never happened. Because Earth was never the battlefield. The humans had never defended their planet. They had attacked first. Before the Zorvith even realized what was happening, the war was already over. The Empire falls, and the humans watch. Zorvith Prime, capital of the Empire. It had taken 1 hour. 60 minutes for everything to collapse. The skies over Zorvith Prime were filled with fire. Spaceports, communication hubs, power stations, all gone. Not destroyed. Not bombed. Taken. Human soldiers moved through the streets like shadows. Silent. Efficient. No plasma bombardments. No indiscriminate killing. They simply arrived. And one by one they turned everything off. The planetary defense grid? Disabled. The fleet yards? Seized. The Imperial Palace? Locked down with a single command. Entire battalions of Zorvith warriors froze in place, their weapons hacked, their armor systems deactivated. They stood helpless, trapped in their own gear. And the worst part? The humans hadn't needed ships to get here. They hadn't needed a fleet. They had simply stepped into the Empire like they had always been there. Like they had been waiting for the Zorvith to attack Earth, so they could finish this in a single day. The last conversation. Back on the captured flagship, the Zorvith commander finally collapsed into a chair. Her body shook. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be happening. Why? She whispered. The human folded his arms. Why what? Her voice cracked. Why did you let us think we could win? For the first time, the human's expression softened. Because we wanted to see if you'd stop. He exhaled. If you had listened, if you had backed off, none of this would have happened. He leaned closer, his voice quieter now. But you didn't. She swallowed hard. What happens now? He tilted his head, considering. Then he smiled. That's up to you. A single transmission flashed across the Zorvith communication network. A message from Earth. It was simple. A choice. Surrender, completely, unconditionally. Or extinction. The commander closed her eyes. She had been wrong about everything. The war had never been about Earth. It had been a warning. And the Zorvith had ignored it. Now they would pay the price. The end? Fire, did you expect this twist? The Zorvith sure didn't. Subscribe now to see what humanity does next. Rocket Skull.